Welcome to Annette on Life, Liberty, and Happiness, a podcast where I talk about the Constitution, politics, history, and pretty much anything else I want to talk about. My name is Annette Bybee, and you can find this podcast on, I guess it's not iTunes anymore. I think it's Apple Podcasts, something like that. Stitcher, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, and on YouTube, although YouTube has decided to censor me. So episode 78 cannot be found on YouTube. If you've looked there, you'll have to find it on iTunes or Stitcher or AnnetteTalks.com. I always forget to mention that I have a website. So go find episode 78, which is with Dr. Jeffrey Barkey, where we talked about the updates on COVID. But YouTube decided that it was quote unquote medical misinformation. So basically, YouTube thinks that you can't handle the truth. Anyway, obviously, censorship is prevalent right now, and I posted this on my Facebook page recently, that the reason it's prevalent right now is because the government has an agenda, and propaganda does not work without censorship. Because the government is busy, and I mean, when I say the government, I mean at all levels, federal, state, local, are all busy pumping out information, what they call truth, about the virus night and day, and saying that it's, that, the only answer is for everyone to get vaccinated. They're not going to be happy until everyone is vaccinated. And so if someone comes on like me with the doctor who was America's frontline doctor, Dr. Barkey, then YouTube's going to say it's misinformation. So, but that's not what this episode is about. YouTube censors. This episode is going to be about critical race theory. And this is one of the biggest, most pernicious problems of our time. And one of the reasons that I feel so strongly about it is that it's one of its aims seems to be to make people like myself feel bad about myself just because of the color of the skin that I was born with. So being a white person in their mind automatically makes me a racist. And so I don't like anything that makes me feel bad about myself for no other reason than the fact that I was born, the color that I am born. And, it's made me reflect a lot on what people of color, Blacks, African Americans, Hispanics, whatever you want to call people who are non-white. I feel for them if they've ever felt bad about themselves for having been born the color that they were born. I now feel the pain and I don't like it. But critical race theory is not the way to fix that problem. While obviously we do have racism in this world and in this country, I don't believe it's systemic, number one, at least not in the US. And I don't believe that reverse discrimination is the way you fix it. There are a lot of answers to that, but this country has come a long way since slavery and in the 60s. I mean, obviously there's always more room for improvement, but you don't do it by making people feel bad about themselves. So, and I'm going to talk about what the other main problems are with critical race theory. As I get into this, I read several articles. The first one that I found that I thought was great was by Christopher F. Rufo, who is the founder and director of Battlefront. And he wrote this article that was in this volume of Imprimis, which is the Hillsdale College publication. And it's called Critical Race Theory, What It Is and How to Fight It. And I actually did reach out to Christopher Rufo and ask him to be on the program, and he politely declined. So I'm going to go ahead and mostly I'm going to be pulling from his article. I read several others and they brought a lot to the discussion, but I thought his had the most useful information. And so I'm going to borrow heavily from it, and I'm going to obviously add my own commentary into it. I feel like this is an evil. Anything that makes you feel bad for who you are, not for what you do, is evil. And so I'm going to go ahead and take it on right now. All right, so I'm going to start reading this, and then I'm going to stop where I feel like I need to add my own commentary. So I'm going to start reading now. Oh, by the way, you can see me on youtube.com/Annette Talks, assuming that this video does not get censored like my episode 78 did. And if it continues to happen, I'm probably going to switch over to BitChute. So I hope you'll all follow me over there. Oh, also, I wanted to mention that in an upcoming, I have a couple of really awesome episodes coming up. Hopefully the next one, this will be the one that I'm about to, this one that I'm recording right now is episode 79. And then the episode 80, I believe it will be, is when I'm going to have a lady who came over from Cuba. And we are going to talk about the differences between living in Cuba and living in the US. If you have anything you want me to ask her, send me an email at Annette@AnnetteTalks.com or shoot me a friend request on Facebook. You can find me under Annette Mashler Baby and shoot me a message there. Or actually sending me an email is probably the easiest way. But I want to know what you want to hear from her. I have a lot of great questions, but I'm always hoping that listeners will interact with me a little bit, let me know what they're looking for. So we're going to have that one where I'm going to talk to the lady from Cuba, and then probably the one directly after that, which will be episode 81, I'm going to have Nate Audison back on, and he is going to show us how to put together a 72-hour kit on a shoestring budget. And then, even more exciting, once he shows us how it's all put together, I'm going to have a contest. And I'm going to ask everyone to subscribe on YouTube and then to share that episode with other people and tell them to subscribe. And then once I hit 1,000 subscribers, I'm going to randomly select a subscriber. It could be someone who subscribed at the beginning or someone recent. I'm not sure how I'm going to do it yet, but I'm going to pick a random subscriber, and then I'm going to send them the 72-hour kit for free that Nate puts together. So you're going to want to see that, which I say again will probably be episode 81. So just looking for the episode about 72-hour kits. All right, so critical race theory, here we go. Critical race theory is fast becoming America's new institutional orthodoxy, yet most Americans have never heard of it. And of those who have, many don't understand it. It's time for this to change. We need to know what it is so we can know how to fight it. And again, I'm reading from Christopher F. Rufo's article, Critical Race Theory, What It Is and How to Fight It. In explaining critical race theory, it helps to begin with a brief history of Marxism. Side note, one of the other articles that I read, the author, he said that CRT is more about, it's more like Maoism than Marxism. And I thought that was interesting, and how back in the 60s and the 70s, that the CCP was involved in a lot of the civil rights issues of the day. I did not know that, but it makes sense in what you'll see where this goes. But basically, the communist idea, whether it's Marxist or Maoist, is heavily tied to this, and you'll see why. All right, back to the article. Originally, the Marxist left built its political program on the theory of class conflict. Marx believed that the primary characteristic of industrial societies was the imbalance of power between capitalists and workers. The solution to that imbalance, according to Marx, was revolution. The workers would eventually gain consciousness of their plight, seize the means of production, overthrow the capitalist class, and usher in a new socialist society. During the 20th century, a number of regimes underwent Marxist-style revolutions, and each ended in disaster. Socialist governments in the Soviet Union, China, Cambodia, Cuba, and elsewhere racked up a body count of nearly 100 million of their own people. They are remembered for their gulags, show trials, executions, and mass starvations. In practice, Marx's ideas unleashed man's darkest brutalities. By the mid-1960s, Marxist intellectuals in the West had begun to acknowledge these failures. They recoiled at revelations of Soviet atrocities and came to realize that workers' revolutions would never occur in Western Europe or the United States, where there were large middle classes and rapidly improving standards of living. Americans in particular had never developed a sense of class consciousness or class division. Most Americans believed in the American dream, the idea that they could transcend their origins through education, hard work, and good citizenship. Another side note, you can see why socialism became huge in England back in the day because they were very, very, and still are, class-conscious country. One of the reasons that the U.S. was ahead of England during the Industrial Revolution was that there were so many people of upper class that didn't want to get their hands dirty in trade or in building things or making things. And well, we didn't have that problem. We're going to go ahead and push this revolution forward with our own hands and our own brute strength, right? We don't care if we get our hands dirty. So anyway, I can see why socialism would have gained approval more in England back in the day, when it felt like if you were not born into the upper class, you were stuck. You could not move up. If you were born in the lower class, you were going to stay there your entire life, just like your parents did. Well, we didn't have that in our country. So that's why it didn't take root here. If we want to move up, we can move up. All right, back to the article. But rather than abandon their leftist political project, which to me, again, side note, if you're a Marxist and you think that having a workers' revolution is going to make things better, and then you see that things are already better without the workers' revolution, why wouldn't you say, hey, cool, I don't need Marxism anymore, I can go do something else? I don't understand that mindset. Anyway, back to the article. Marxist scholars in the West simply adapted their revolutionary theory to the social and racial unrest of the 1960s. Abandoning Marx's economic dialectic of capitalists and workers, they substituted race for class and sought to create a revolutionary coalition of the dispossessed based on racial and ethnic categories. So that's huge right there. I want you to put this firmly in your brain. They substituted race for class and sought to create a revolutionary coalition of the dispossessed based on racial and ethnic categories. And so I think I kind of answered my own question. It's just that these people want revolution. They don't care what kind of revolution. They just want revolution. Because you know what happens at the end of the revolution, right? You have all the useful idiots that end up as the slave class. And then if you were heading or leading that revolution, you get to end up as the ruling class. And you get to have all the money and all the perks while the lower classes, the slaves, serfs, get nothing. That's what we saw in the Soviet Union, in Cuba, Venezuela, elsewhere. Also, another side note, I had Dinesh D'Souza on a while back, and if you go and find that episode, he talks about why, he basically makes the same case what Rufo just made in a nutshell here, but that the reason that you're seeing not just race, but also, like he says, Rufo says, dispossessed. That's why you see the LGBTQ, the transgender, all that, along with racial minorities, using that sort of outsider mentality and to create a coalition of people to become the rulers. And that's his book, United States of Socialism. Dinesh D'Souza's makes the case that that's what they're doing, that it's the same thing that they did in Venezuela, where there's this huge emphasis on race. And you had to be brown or black, but not white. Anybody not white was better than white. And so now you see the same thing here. All of a sudden, if you're anything but white, you're cool, you're okay. But if you're white, you're racist. Just by nature of who you were born white, you're racist. There's nothing you can do to fix that. And and then you take that, and then so you take all these dispossessed people, whether it's a racial minority, or how they identify as far as their sexual preferences or their genders, if they're non-binary. That's how you have all these dispossessed people, and they are creating their own coalition of people that are basically going to instill socialism on the rest of us. And if we're stupid enough to go along and feel guilty for something we never did, or for what maybe our ancestors might have done, then we are basically digging our own grave. All right, back to the article. Fortunately, the early proponents of this revolutionary coalition in the U.S. lost out in the 60s to the civil rights movement, which sought instead the fulfillment of the American promise of freedom and equality. Circle equality, not equity. under the law. Americans preferred the idea of improving their country to that of overthrowing it. The vision of Martin Luther King Jr., President Johnson's pursuit of the Great Society, and the restoration of law and order promised by Richard Nixon in his 1968 campaign defined the post-1960s American political consensus. But the radical left has proved resilient and enduring, which is where critical race theory comes in. What it is. Critical race theory is an academic discipline formulated in the 1990s. It's amazing to me that this is the 90s, and here we are, and it took till 2021 or 2020 before it really came to the forefront. Built on the intellectual framework of identity-based Marxism. Relegated for many years to universities and obscure academic journals, over the past decade, it has increasingly become the default ideology in our public institutions. It has been injected into government agencies, public school systems, teacher training programs, and corporate human resources departments in the form of diversity training programs, human resources modules, public policy frameworks, and school curricula. And I would add that now you see it in healthcare, right? If you want to get your COVID vaccine shot, on Facebook, you'll see all these little ads going by, but we're promoting equity in the COVID vaccines, which translates to you'll get it first if you're a person of color. So it's racist, but it's not racist as in white people racist. So apparently there's good racist and bad racist. If you're a white person, you're a bad racist. If you're a brown or black person judging white people, you're a good racist. So I'll try to keep up with that. All right. There are a series of euphemisms deployed by its supporters to describe critical race theory, including equity, social justice, diversity and inclusion, and culturally responsive training. So whenever you see these words, equity, social justice, diversity and inclusion, and culturally responsive teaching, just realize that they're saying critical race theory. Critical race theorists, masters of language construction, realize that neo-Marxism would be a hard sell. Equity, on the other hand, sounds non-threatening and is easily confused with the American principle of equality. But the distinction is vast and important. Indeed, equality, the principle proclaimed in the Declaration of Independence, defended in the Civil War, and codified into law with the 14th and 15th Amendments, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, is explicitly rejected by critical race theorists. To them, equality represents mere non-discrimination and provides camouflage for white supremacy, patriarchy, and oppression. In contrast to equality, equity as defined and promoted by critical race theorists is little more than reformulated Marxism. In the name of equity, UCLA law professor and critical race theorist Cheryl Harris has proposed suspending private property rights, seizing land and wealth, and redistributing them along racial lines. Critical race guru Ibram X. Kendi, who directs the Center for Anti-Racist Research at Boston University, has proposed the creation of a federal department of anti-racism. This department would be independent of, i.e., unaccountable to, the elected branches of government and would have the power to nullify, veto, or abolish any law at any level of government and curtail the speech of political leaders and others who are deemed insufficiently anti-racist. This, again, another side note, that would be the abolition, the destruction of America as we know it right there. If this were to happen, that we would have this Department of Anti-Racism with all of these huge powers. We would be done. We would just be done. The rule of law would mean nothing anymore because whoever controlled this department could basically say anything they want, and if you're white, you lose everything. That's what that boils down to. Also, I just want to point out, I mean, this is becoming very obvious, but obviously the difference between equity and equality is equity is about equal outcomes for groups. So not only equal outcomes for individuals, but equal outcomes for groups. whereas equality is about individuals having an equal right to try, equal rights to do your best. So obviously under equality, people are going to end up with different outcomes because we're human beings. We all have different talents, abilities, desires. We're human. We're not supposed to end up being in the exact same place. We're not robots. But that's not what equity is about. Equity is about saying, well, this race over here has done poorly overall in comparison to this race over here. So therefore, we're going to take stuff from the race that's done better and give it to the race that's not done as well. And that way we're going to have equity. Everyone's going to have the same outcome. Back to the article. One practical result of the creation of such a department would be the overthrow of capitalism. Since according to Kendi, in order to truly be anti-racist, you also have to truly be anti-capitalist. Okay, so this is in a nutshell right here. The guy, this is our one of our kings of critical race theory. In order to truly be anti-racist, you also have to truly be anti-capitalist. In other words, identity is the means and Marxism is the end. And side note again, if you doubt that most of a lot of these black rights movements are Marxist, go look at Black Lives Matter Inc. Go to their website. I'm assuming it's still there, but it says that they are trained Marxists. They said that in one of their interviews, that they are trained Marxists. So if you think that all of this stuff is really about racism, it's not. It's about Marxism. Identity is the means and Marxism is the end. Back to the article. An equity-based form of government would mean the end not only of private property, but also of individual rights, equality under the law, federalism, and freedom of speech. These would be replaced by race-based redistribution of wealth, group-based rights, active discrimination, and omnipotent bureaucratic authority. Historically, the accusation of anti-Americanism has been overused, but in this case, it's not a matter of interpretation. The critical race theory prescribes a revolutionary program that would overturn the principles of the Declaration and destroy the remaining structure of the Constitution. That's the goal. That is the goal here. So when you start hearing critical race theories coming to your school or it's in your school, you cannot sit back and be like, no big deal, because the end of the Republic as we know it is the goal. As I get further into the article, you'll see the solutions that he proposes. How it works. What does critical race theory look like in practice? Last year, I authored a series of reports focused on critical race theory in the federal government. The FBI was holding workshops on intersectionality theory. The Department of Homeland Security was telling white employees they were committing micro inequities and had been socialized into oppressor roles. The Treasury Department held a training session telling staff members that virtually all white people contribute to racism and that they must convert everyone in the federal government to the ideology of anti-racism. And the Sandia National Laboratories, which design America's nuclear arsenal, sent white male executives to a 3-day re-education camp where they were told that white male culture was analogous to the KKK, white supremacists, and mass killings. The executives were then forced to renounce their white male privilege and write letters of apology to fictitious women and people of color. This year, I produced another series of reports focused on critical race theory in education. In Cupertino, California, an elementary school forced first graders to deconstruct their racial and sexual identities and rate themselves according to their power and privilege. In Springfield, Missouri, a middle school forced teachers to locate themselves on an oppression matrix based on the idea that straight, white, English-speaking Christian males are members of the oppressor class and must atone for their privilege and convert white supremacy. In Philadelphia, an elementary school forced fifth graders to celebrate Black communism and simulate a Black power rally to free 1960s radical Angela Davis from prison, where she had once been held on charges of murder. And in Seattle, the school district told white teachers that they are guilty of spirit murder against Black children and must bankrupt their privilege in acknowledgement of their thieved inheritance. I'm just one investigative journalist, but I've developed a database of more than 1,000 of these stories. When I say that critical race theory is becoming the operating ideology of our public institutions, it is not an exaggeration. From the universities to bureaucracies to K-12 school systems, critical race theory has permeated the collective intelligence and decision-making process of American government with no sign of slowing down. Look at President Biden and what he's done with his federal agencies, and you'll see. There was a CIA commercial that came out recently on YouTube. I don't know if it was outed on YouTube or put there purposely by this woke CIA agent telling us all about how she's cisgender and Latinx and has generalized anxiety disorder. I don't know about you, but having someone with generalized anxiety disorder in the CIA doesn't really make me feel all that comforted. But that's what this administration is all about. And you're going to see it more and more of this unless we do anything to stop it at every level of government. Back to the article. This is a revolutionary change. When originally established, these government institutions were presented as neutral, technocratic, and oriented towards broadly held perceptions of the public good. Today, under the increasing sway of critical race theory and related ideologies, they are being turned against the American people. This isn't limited to the permanent bureaucracy in Washington, D.C., but is true as well of institutions in the states, even in red states, and it is spreading to county public health departments, small Midwestern school districts, and more. This ideology will not stop until it has devoured all of our institutions. Feudal resistance. Thus far, attempts to halt the encroachment of critical race theory have been ineffective. There are a number of reasons for this. First, too many Americans have developed an acute fear of speaking up about social and political issues, especially those involving race. According to a recent Gallup poll, 77% of conservatives are afraid to share their political beliefs publicly. Worried about getting mobbed on social media, fired from their jobs, or worse, they remain quiet, largely ceding the public debate to those pushing these anti-American ideologies. Consequently, the institutions themselves become monocultures, dogmatic, suspicious, and hostile to a diversity of opinion. Conservatives in both the federal government and public school systems have told me that their equity inclusion departments serve as political offices searching for and stamping out any dissent from the official orthodoxy. That right there should tell you something. If there's an ideology that does not allow competing or differing opinions, it's bankrupt. It's more of a religion than an ideology, and it's evil. So, second, critical race theorists have constructed their argument like a mousetrap. Disagreement with their program becomes irrefutable evidence of a dissenter's white fragility, unconscious bias, or internalized white supremacy. I've seen this projection of false consciousness on their opponents play out dozens of times in my reporting. Diversity trainers will make an outrageous claim such as all whites are intrinsically oppressors, or white teachers are guilty of spirit murdering black children. And then when confronted with disagreement, they adopt a patronizing tone and explain that participants who feel defensiveness or anger are reacting out of guilt and shame. Dissenters are instructed to remain silent, lean into the discomfort, and accept their complicity in white supremacy. Third, Americans across the political spectrum have failed to separate the premise of critical race theory from its conclusion. Its premise that American history includes slavery and other injustices, and that we should examine and learn from that history is undeniable. But its revolutionary conclusion that America was founded on and defined by racism, and that our founding principles, our Constitution, and our way of life should be overthrown does not rightly, much less necessarily follow. Fourth and finally, the writers and activists who have had the courage to speak out against critical race theory have tended to address it on the theoretical level, pointing out the theory's logical contradictions and dishonest account of history. These criticisms are worthy and good, but they move the debate into the academic realm, which is friendly terrain for proponents of critical race theory. They fail to force defenders of this revolutionary ideology to defend the practical consequences of their ideas in the realm of politics. political engagement. No longer simply an academic matter, critical race theory has become a tool of political power. We know that's what it's all about anyway, right? BLM Inc. is not about bringing power to the Black race. It's about bringing money into the pockets of BLM Inc., which we saw with, what's her name, who went out and bought like 4 mansions recently. And they have incredible power because everyone's lining up to back them. Remember when all those corporations lined up and put BLM on their websites? How powerful is that, to get corporations to line up and parrot your expressions? So obviously it's about power at the high level, not at the low level. Again, useful idiots never end up any place except for as slaves. And that's what's going to happen here if people do not stand up now and speak out against it. Back to the article. To borrow a phrase from the Marxist theoretician Antonio Gramsci, it is fast achieving cultural hegemony in America's public institutions. More and more, it is driving the vast machinery of the state and the society. If we want to succeed in opposing it, we must address it politically at every level. Critical race theorists must be confronted with and forced to speak to the facts. Do they support public schools separating first graders into groups of oppressors and oppressed? Do they support mandatory curricula teaching that all white people play a part in perpetuating systemic racism? Do they support public schools instructing white parents to become white traitors and advocate for white abolition? Do they want those who work in government to be required to undergo this kind of re-education? How about managers and workers in corporate America? How about the men and women in our military? How about every one of us? There are 3 parts to a successful strategy to defeat the forces of critical race theory: governmental action, grassroots mobilization, and an appeal to principle. We already see examples of governmental action. Last year, one of my reports led President Trump to issue an executive order banning critical race theory-based training programs in the federal government. President Biden rescinded this order on his first day in office, but it provides a model for governors and municipal leaders to follow. This year, several state legislatures have introduced bills to achieve the same goal: preventing public institutions from conducting programs that stereotype, scapegoat, or demean people on the basis of race. And I have organized a coalition of attorneys to file lawsuits against schools and government agencies that impose critical race theory-based programs on grounds of the First Amendment, which protects citizens from compelled speech, the 14th Amendment, which provides equal protection under the law, and the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which prohibits public institutions from discriminating on the basis of race. So I'm thinking, if I find out that one of my schools is teaching critical race theory and forcing these things on my kids, I'm going to get a hold of Chris Rufo and find out who these lawyers are that he's got lined up to help fight this and sue the school. And actually, what I'm doing too is I've signed up to speak at the next school board meeting for our county school board. And I'm going to talk about, COVID and masks and vaccines, but I'm also going to tell them that I'm not going to put up with critical race theory in the school. I'll either sue the school board, and or take my kids out of school and homeschool them, and encourage others to do the same thing. So, because I'm also thinking, just recently I got sold on the idea of homeschooling. If enough of us do that, we can change the landscape of public schools. Also, charter schools are another good option if you have a good one in your area that does not subscribe to things like critical race theory. Take your kids to that. That's another option I'm looking at as a charter school. Okay, back to the article. On the grassroots level, a multiracial and bipartisan coalition is emerging to do battle against critical race theory. Parents are mobilizing against racially divisive curricula in public schools, and employees are increasingly speaking out against Orwellian re-education in the workplace. When they see what is happening, Americans are naturally outraged that critical race theory promotes 3 ideas: race essentialism, collective guilt, and neo-segregation, which violates the basic principles of equality and justice. Anecdotally, many Chinese Americans have told me that having survived the Cultural Revolution in their former country, they refuse to let the same thing happen here. Good for them. In terms of principles, we need to employ our own moral language rather than allow ourselves to be confined by the categories of critical race theory. For example, we often find ourselves debating diversity. Diversity, as most of us understand it, is generally good, all things being equal, but it is of secondary value. We should be talking about and aiming at excellence, a common standard that challenges people of all backgrounds to achieve their potential. On the scale of desirable ends, excellence beats diversity every time. Yeah, this is why on my Facebook page, I shared that YouTube video with that CIA agent, the woke one, that basically was bragging about how woke she was. And what I said was, what I want to know is, can she do her job? That's what we care about. I don't care what race you are or what you identify with as gender-wise. I don't care if you have generalized anxiety disorder. I don't want to know that. I want to know, can you do the job, whatever it is you're being asked to do? I want to know that you strive for excellence, because that's what matters. When I'm under the knife, I could care less about what your race is. I want to know that you know how to use that knife. All right, back to the article. Above all, we must have courage, the fundamental virtue required in our time. Courage to stand and speak the truth. Courage to withstand epithets. Courage to face the mob. Courage to shrug off the scorn of the elites. When enough of us overcome the fear that currently prevents so many from speaking out, the hold of critical race theory will begin to slip. And courage begets courage. It's easy to stop a lone dissenter. It's much harder to stop 10, 20, 100, 1,000, a million or more who stand up together for the principles of America. Truth and justice are on our side. If we can muster the courage, we will win. That's the end of the article. I want to echo that. Standing up and saying something, I can't tell you how many times that I've said something either in person somewhere or on Facebook, and people line up to say, yes, I agree. But yet I don't see them saying those things on their Facebook page because they don't have the courage to. And I am constantly getting instant messages on Facebook of people sending me things that they don't want to post on their own page, but they want it posted because I'll have the courage to do it. And this is something else that I thought of today. I may die alone, penniless, not successful by the world standards, but nobody will ever look at me at my headstone and say, but where did she stand on freedom? That is never going to be an open question when it comes to me. And I hope it'll never be a question when it comes to you. I hope that you will have the courage to stand up for things. If you do not have the courage to stand up for things because you're afraid of how it's going to affect your career or your family, what I just said should hopefully change your mind on that. If we have the destruction of our country as we know it now, your family, your kids are not going to have the opportunity to have that career that you have right now. Your career will go away because they're talking about putting in a bureaucracy that will abolish private property. So now is the time to have the courage. Now is the time to take the risk of losing those things that you hold dear. Because if you do not take the risk, you will lose those things. It seems pretty much like it seems like there's nothing you need to think about here. You just need to realize what's at stake and have the courage to stand up. Stand up to your school board, stand up to your school, stand up to your boss, stand up on social media, and stand up for what's right. Stand up for excellence, stand up for individual rights, stand up for the Constitution, stand up for the Declaration, stand up for America the way it was intended to be, and not the way these Marxists want to turn it into. That's not who we are. That's not who we're going to be if we can stand up now and have the courage to do it. So I'm going to get off my soapbox now. Please join me in standing up against this. YouTube is going to censor me. If they do, I'll go to BitChute. Facebook might fact check me. I'll go somewhere else if I need to. I'll go to MeWe. We've got to stand up now, people, or we're going to lose our country. All right, sorry. Back off the soapbox again. Go do your own homework on this. Go study critical race theory and then start speaking out again. against it. All right. Again, watch for future episodes. If you have not subscribed on YouTube, please go to youtube.com, type in Annette Talks, subscribe, share it with a friend, and let's get me lots and lots of listeners and subscribers so we can get the word out. And please, if you want to say something, agree, disagree, show me your moral support, go to Annette or email Annette at AnnetteTalks.com. If you really want to help, go to patreon.com/Annette Talks. Send me $2 a month. That would be awesome. I'm not making a dime off of this yet, people. And I may never make a dime off of it, but I'm still going to keep doing it. All right. Thanks for listening to Annette on Life, Liberty, and Happiness, where freedom lovers gather.